Let's see. Oh, wait. Okay. Today we're so pleased to have these authors with us, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. I'm sure a lot of you are fans and know all of this, but to my left is Gaby Dunn, a best-selling author, journalist, television writer, actress, and LGBTQ activist living in Los Angeles. Her podcast, Bad with Money, was named one of the top 10 podcasts of 2016 by the New York Times, along with her comedy partner, Allison Raskin. Gaby stars in, writes, and produces the YouTube channel Just Between Us, which has been viewed over 140 million times. Their 2017 novel, I Hate Everyone But You, was New York Times bestseller, and its sequel, Please Send Help, was published in July 2019. Gaby's graphic novel, Bury the Lead, comes out on October 8th from Boom Studios, and her latest book is Bad with Money, the imperfect art of getting your financial shit together. To my right is Lane Moore, the author of the best-selling book, How to Be Alone, which received praise from the New York Times, New York Magazine, NPR, and countless others. She is also award-winning stand-up comedian, author, musician living in New York City. Paste Magazine named her number 19 of the 75 funniest people on Twitter. Refinery 29 named her one of the female comedians you need to know, and Out Magazine named her one of the Out 100 of 2017. Her monthly comedy show, Tinder Live, was named the New York Times Critics' Picks, and CBS called it one of the 5 best comedy shows in NYC. Her band, It Was Romance, was named by Billboard as one of the 16 female-fronted bands you should know. Mm-hmm. So both of these authors have written books about things that seem really deceptively mundane. It's money. We always talk about money, and it's a part of the daily back and forth of our lives. Relationships, and we're always thinking about identity and our relationships to our families and our friends, and millions of decisions per day are made about both of these things. But I think when you scratch the surface of either one, you get a lot of of really deep stuff and some painful stuff, and you realize that maybe there are taboos around talking about both of these topics that prevent us from really confronting them and making the productive decisions that might be more beneficial to us if we really handle them head on. But there's a lot of taboo around discussing some of the tougher aspects of them. So I think there's a lot of overlap with these two books, and also I want to get into a little bit, if we could, during this time, a little bit about your process, because there's a lot of, I think, overlap in terms of how it is today to be an author and to be kind of a multi-platform personality, and whether that's a personal choice or whether that's sort of an expected thing now to be able to communicate in the world at a baseline level. So, but first, I would like these two to read for us a selection from the books, and so if you guys, I don't know who wants to go first.
I don't know how long. I am so unprepared. I don't know how long this part is. But maybe I could just do a timer. Or actually, I'll just do a little, I'll just stop at a certain point. Is that cool?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I've let everyone down. And then I'll go. And then I'm sure you probably have a selection that you've picked and are prepared. And
oh yeah, absolutely. I have a really definitive one that I came with that I chose above all else.
Timed it.
Didn't fan through and go, I guess 18.
Cool.
No, didn't do that at all.
Great. Everyone's doing their best. Okay. Okay, so this is from Bad with Money. The first couple times I was given the diagnosis bipolar 2, I ignored it. I didn't tell my parents or my friends. I never followed up. I just pretended I hadn't heard it. Bipolar is a mood disorder with 2 main mood swings: depression, down, and mania, up. Depression alone is a bit more common and, in my experience, easier for the average person to understand. But depression does not just mean sad. When I'm depressed, I'm in physical pain. Mania or hypomania is harder to grasp. Mania can be euphoric, nothing can stop you, you're the best, or depressive, mean, desperate. Either way, I stop thinking, I lose control. The only time I'd privately hinted to another person that I might be bipolar was in a conversation with my mom when I was visiting from New York in 2011. We were sitting at the kitchen table and I told her a therapist suggested the condition might apply to me. Her response was something about how all the women on her side of the family have mood swings. And I said, yes, bipolar disorder is genetic. It would make sense if we were all bipolar. She shrugged it off. A specific diagnosis didn't seem important to her. It was just a family curse. So I never followed up on my therapist's opinion. Blah, 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 pass. Okay. The only public hint I gave to being bipolar was in 2012 when I wrote What It's Like to Be Manic, an article for Thought Catalog. I never specified if it was fiction or nonfiction, since the site trafficked in both. Even in that article, I purposefully didn't use the word bipolar because I was too scared of the scarlet bee of the stigma. I was and am terrified of being written off as crazy. For someone who makes a living being transparent about her life on the internet, I'd left out a huge chunk of my story. So I'll come clean here. I'm bipolar, and for as long as it's taken me to open up about my disorder, it's taken me even longer to connect the dots between my mental health and my finances. Here's a snippet of the piece I wrote in 2012 explaining my brain on mania. Then it's 3 hours later, and I've learned a few phrases in Mandarin and looked up good science graduate programs and bought a book on eBay about musical writing, and none of this is actually useful. I've just made myself sick with expectations and self-imposed musts. This includes spending money I didn't have on whims I didn't need. I told myself all of these impulsive purchases were deserved. There were specific purchases I needed to do, that I needed to do my best work. For instance, the book on writing musicals. I never wrote a musical unless you count my unproduced treatment for the rock opera What's My Age Again, the Blink-182-sicle. Mark Hoppus, please call me. When I was manic, I wanted to spend all my money because life was a breeze and who cared about social constructs like money. When I was down, I desperately needed material things to make me feel better. No matter what state I was in, I convinced myself not to look at my finances or try to sort out my bank accounts or plan for the future because it was too stressful and I was too fragile right now. And then I have like a breakdown, whatever. When my birthday came around in June, I threw myself a massive party at the Improv Theater where I performed in downtown New York City. The boy I was interested in didn't show up because he was fighting with his girlfriend, so I got super, super drunk, and I ended up going home with 2 male friends and having a very fun but very ill-advised threesome. I took a too expensive cab back to my place in Harlem in the small hours of the morning and promptly passed out. The next day, I awoke with a massive hangover, and I couldn't stop shaking. The mere thought of food caused the shaking to intensify. I tried to eat some spinach, which I normally love, and I threw it up violently. Blah, 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 more breakdown stuff. Eventually, I became okay enough to go back to my apartment in Harlem. Luckily, I was working for a blog where people sometimes failed to show up to work due to cocaine. So my taking some time because of my bad brain chemistry was totally within reason. I must have gone back to working, but I don't remember it. I figured this extreme manic depressive episode was a one-off. But 2 days later, I bought, wait for it, a plane ticket to Europe. And I'll leave it there. It gets worse throughout that chapter. Europe doesn't solve it, it turns out.
Oh, okay, I should just
Lean more.
go. Okay, cool. This is from a chapter called Please Just Be a Good Person So I Can Finally Be Someone Who Has Friends. When you don't have the affection and or attachment you should have at home, it's totally natural that you'd quickly become someone who is obsessed with friendships. Kids with stable home lives can make friends in that casual take 'em or leave 'em way, but you, poor you, will want to make friends in a desperate, gasping for air while drowning kind of way. And so did I. Because of that, I can say with some certainty that I was bananas in love with every best girlfriend I had from the ages of 6 to 17. The only reason the to the ends of the earth love stops there is because that type of girlfriendship can be harder to come by as you get older. And even when you do find that person, being friends with your very own Rayanne Graff from My So-Called Life is not always fun and light and drawing yin and yang symbols on your notebooks and shaving your vulvas together. Though, to be honest, I never watched that show growing up and only got into it a few years ago, despite a guy I knew in my teens telling me I was such a Rayanne because I almost accidentally hit some nuns with my car when I turned too far right in the grocery store parking lot, and I am very sorry for it every day. Poor nuns. Very often, best girl friendship, especially of the middle and high school variety, is more along the lines of near-death experiences and sleeping with Jordan Catalano betrayal. I think I need to rewatch this, though, because I remember very little about this show, except that Angela had, 0 problems, and the show focused on her as though she had all the problems. That said, this has been true of 8 million shows about men who have zero problems, who feel like they have all the problems, so okay, fine. For those of you who have yet to experience the awkward teenage magic found within virtually any episode of My So-Called Life, Rayanne Graff is the enigmatic, Janis Joplin-esque best friend of straight-laced, until she dyed her hair red, Angela Chase, and Jordan Catalano was a boy who would fit snugly into any bad boy the teen girl has a crush on category in which you'd like to place him, especially if that category includes qualities like white guy in a band and secretly illiterate. I was not a Rayanne in high school, but I don't think I was an Angela either. No one really is a fictional character down to a T, but I definitely followed more than led, adored more than was adored. In other words, my best girlfriend growing up was some loud, endlessly hilarious, total knockout girl in a crop top and hot pants, whom I stood beside making jokes while covered in glitter and non-threatening supportive cuteness, which, to be fair, is how I'm dressed right now. I see it, I know. In junior high, that girl was Sam. Sam had long, blonde Courtney Love hair and shopped at the cool girl stores in the mall because that was her style. Unlike me, who in those years just shopped in the stores that carried the right clothes to avoid bullying. I'm pretty sure, look, I'm wearing Abercrombie even though it's overpriced nonsense trash, please don't hurt me, was the store's unofficial slogan. I still don't believe anyone shopped there for any other reason. Sam was an amazing photographer and indulged my love of creating filthy flip books about a character named Fred who was constantly doing inappropriate sexual things in a hilariously irreverent manner and making fake newspapers that were basically a ripoff of The Onion, but based on people we knew because I'd never read The Onion. Which is tremendous foreshadowing because years later, it would become my dream to work at The Onion and a dream I would realize. If I wanted to spend the whole day speaking in what were probably regionally inaccurate accents, she would too. If I wanted to act out imagined scenes between Ginger and Baby Spice, who I believed had a vaguely sexual relationship, she went there with me. And it later turned out they were all fucking, I'm just saying. I didn't know that at the time of this print, but I would have put that in all caps. Obviously, I was Ginger Spice. I think that's clear. Also, this was definitely a convenient way for us to be like, we like each other. Ha ha, no we don't. Baby and Ginger Spice do. We aren't gay, they're gay. We're just playing gay characters who do gay things, but we don't because we're not gay. Ha ha, if you shout it, it becomes more true. Sam was the best sidekick ever, though I always felt like her sidekick, her weird, goofy friend who would do any dare as long as it wasn't physically dangerous or sexual. We had mostly the same taste in movies and consumed them voraciously while quoting all the lines and doing the dance numbers, if there were dance numbers together, and imagining which of the characters we'd be like when we got older. We dream of moving to Los Angeles together like Romy and Michelle, getting an apartment together, and finally being pretty. Granted, I always thought Sam was the hands-down prettiest girl in the world, but not in the way you're picturing her. Sam wasn't movie star hot or even the most popular girl in school. But to me, if I can sound like a gayer version of Love Actually for a moment, she was perfect. Sam looked like she would have been more at home in the 70s than in the present day, and was also a size 4, and I know this because she constantly talked about how that was too fat. I was twice her size, so I would just stare at her, hoping my confusion would penetrate her like a visual blood transfusion. But that's the thing about teenage girls. Whether you're the heaviest or the thinnest, the most striking or the most plain, the world has effectively convinced you you're hideous. So you have that in common, though you won't know that till years later. I'm struggling to describe Sam to you in a way you can see clearly, and not just because I hate lengthy descriptions. The bookshelf was a soft oak with big bookends that looked like mountains hovering around trees that had been kissed with snow. Ugh, it's a bookshelf, I get it. But because when I remember people I really loved, I just remember a feeling. But nonetheless, fuck it, let's try. You know the quiet girl in your 8th grade class who kind of scared you, but then occasionally would laugh in a way where it seemed like she was surprised she had that much joy inside her, and even more surprised it found a way to escape? That was Sam. You know the girl who was carrying more pain than you realized at the time, but whenever you went left, she went left because going left seemed fun. And if you decided to go right while walking like a toad because that just seems fun, she was already immediately walking like an A+ toad and was 5 steps ahead of you? That was Sam. You know the girl who was the best at every subject because she genuinely cared about school, but would also participate in your endless inside jokes about masturbation and spit her milk out while you did spot-on impressions of Jewel? That was Sam.
Aww. I think if Ginger was your favorite Spice Girl, you're gay now.
Absolutely.
Right?
I was like, oh,
mine.
I identify with her, and she was easily the most noticeably bisexual. I
Right?
felt. Yeah.
That's bi culture.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
No. Mel C was pretty cute. So, but So, you guys, these are books that have a very autobiographical side to them. Yours is really laying more of a memoir, but in a way, like the title kind of hints at this advice book, right? And I think that there's a desire seemingly to have someone be able to take some wisdom from, what you've gone through. And I was going to ask you guys now sort of talking about the very, very specific things that happen in your lives, like where you kind of widen the lens and think that might be of some help to share, and how that sort of then goes into the world of advice.
Well, that's a trick. I mean, I went to school for journalism, and that was a trick that I learned there, which is when you're interviewing someone to just start talking about yourself, and that'll make them feel comfortable. So instead of kind of being like, oh, and how did it feel that your husband was murdered? You can kind of be like, yeah, my grandmother passed away last year. Death is so hard. It was like really crazy going to the funeral home, and like, so how did that feel for you? Like, it's much, I mean, even if it's so loose like that, like it was much easier to get people to feel like they could open up to to telling you things if you start telling them things. And so that's how, like with this book, the book is about money, right? And it's like a very dry subject. But if I can be like, look, this is like a thing that I did where I blew a bunch of money on sneakers because I had no idea about taxes, and didn't save anything for taxes or whatever as a freelancer. Like, once I say that I did some dumb stuff, then I feel like people are like, okay, I can listen to this person's advice. They're not going to talk down to me. They're not being condescending. They're not coming to me from a place of like I always think about, like, during one of the presidential debate or town halls in 2016 or 2008, maybe, Mitt Romney was like, they were like, how do you get young people to like get involved in business? And Mitt Romney was like, you just like ask your parents for $10,000. And I remember being like, oh no. And I think like, although now I wish he was president, but I think like, it was this thing where I realized that a lot of the people that are talking about money are coming from a place where they can't even begin to relate to the average person. So then with this book, in order to give advice, I had to be like, I'm a fuck up. Now here's some advice.
So it's always interesting to me, like, what people's perception of the book is, whether they think that it is an advice book, because it absolutely is, but I wanted it to be an indirect advice book because those are my favorite types of things, and I wanted it to be a leading by example, similarly, exactly to what Gaby was saying. But I hate most self-help books, and I hate most advice books because most of them are really prescriptive in a way that's universal, when most people's problems are so fucking personal and intimate, and like just telling everybody that there's one catch-all for how they need to solve their life. Like, for example, here's something I'm still angry about from the internet. There was, I tweeted the other day that like I was talking to my therapist about feeling lonely, and some like Reddit jerk off like slid into my DMs or like my mentions, and he was like, see, you're saying that your book doesn't work. And I was just like, oh my fucking God. Like I think that anybody who would write a book about loneliness and in the end either says that they're completely healed from whatever they've been through or tells you there's one way to heal, they're lying to you. They're lying to you to sell books. That's literally it. I wanted my book to be like, hey, like so many books, especially by women about any kind of trauma or loneliness, end with them marrying some man and being magically healed. And that didn't happen for me, and that doesn't work for anybody. Even if you do get married, you can get divorced. Your husband could be a piece of shit. I don't know. But there is no one prescriptive guarantee. But what I did know, and I did want to share, is I kind of felt like what I talk a lot in the book about how I was born into a family, big quotes. I was born into a bunch of people who were not there. So I've been alone pretty much exactly since I was born, I would say. You know what, I'm gonna remove the pretty much. I've been alone my whole life. I'm gonna stop fucking doing that and softening it, it's true. And I wanted to talk about that because we never talk about it, and I had never seen it written about. I'd never seen anybody write about, most of the stories we see are like my dad wasn't great, but everyone else just like swaddled me in love, like good for you. But like, it was very painful to have never, ever, ever read a story like that. Or like, you know, I was born into a really rough family and then I was adopted, or then this happened. Like, something magical always happens, and that was not the case for me. And so I thought, well, I'm gonna kind of like terrifyingly stand up in like a room full of people, you know, in a metaphorical sense, and say like, hey, I have really been on my own most of my life in this way that you're not supposed to talk about. It's entirely possible I'm the only person who feels this way on the entire planet, but I'm gonna say it because I'm just so tired of holding it in. And then the result has been like, I get like 200 letters a week being like, I thought I was the only person until I read your book. And I'm like, shit. It still blows my mind. Like, I still can't believe there's anyone else like me in the world, but neither can they, so.
So, thanks. So I think that, you know, there's something really interesting about you guys both confronting painful things and in touchy subjects in with regard to the money and finances in your family and that kind of thing. That and in some ways you're confronting them in a really forthright way, and then other times you're dealing with them with a sense of humor and a sort of in a comedic way, and that got me thinking about the Hannah Gadsby, you know, the sort of what is comedy and how do we use comedy to really talk about the truth and how we expect sort of at the end of these comedic performances of uplift and hope, and sometimes it's like there's value in having it still be dark and raggedy and that it doesn't necessarily get solved, but you know, we're getting somewhere just by talking about it or surfacing things. So I wanted you guys to talk a little bit about comedy. I mean, you're both described as comedians, and you both have written for outlets that are on their face comedy outlets. So just wanted you to speak to that a little bit, use of humor.
Having a tough time with that right now, actually, because I have a new therapist who I'll like talk about something and then I'll make it funny, and then her thing is very straight faced to go, that's not a funny story, like, because she'll be like, that's a sad story that you just told, and I'll be like, no, because this and this, and she'll be like, no, and I'm like, oh, and I haven't really had a lot of people do that. But I think like a lot of the way, it's just like a coping mechanism. It's just the way of getting things across. And like you learn, I think, like when in Lane talking about the way that she interacted with her friend when she was in high school, it's like that's how you talk to people. That's how you learn to like get attention, or that's how you learn to sort of like make yourself stand out in school in some way, or because you don't think you have really anything else, and you're kind of like, okay, how do I navigate the world, or how do I get people off my back, right? So like if something sad happens, right, you can just go like no and make a joke, and then like people feel better. Like a lot of like the therapist doing that is weird because most of the time people will go ha and then just like move it along, and so like I think it's just a way of communicating the information, again, that's like either dry or sad or hard to swallow in a way that like people aren't like put off by.
Yeah, I remember when you were talking, I was like remembering a day senior year of high school, and two of my friends like came into drama class, because of course I was in drama, and they came into class and they were like, all right, tell me your crazy stories from last night. And like all my crazy stories were like incredibly upsetting.
Yep.
But like to them it was just like watching the news. I don't know what it was. Like I was like a walking sketch comedy show. And I remember saying to him, like, actually, like, last night was really fucked up. I don't really have, like, any funny stories. And he literally goes, oh, okay, well, I'll talk to you later. And it, like, ripped my heart out. And I think about that all the time because I felt that way through, like, it really was one of those, like, flashbulb moments that, like, I think I'll remember till I die, because it cemented a message I always kind of knew on some level, which is that, like, if I wasn't funny, it wasn't worth it to anybody. Like, if it was problems wrapped in something that people could be entertained by, then that's what people wanted. But if it was anything else, like, people would leave. And but in all of the things that I did, like when I was at the Onion, I was the only non-cis straight white dude at the paper, and so I was writing about queer issues, I was writing about domestic violence, I was writing about feminist things, because that wasn't being done there. So I'd always wanted to infuse my jokes, my humor. Even, The Onion is purely comedic. It couldn't be more purely that, but I wanted to infuse as much, as many real topics as I can, because that's just extremely my shit. And then I also wonder too, like, if I think it's interesting that like so many of my guy friends, like men I know in comedy, their comedy style is so like, I'm gonna joke about space and wacky balloons. And then, women and non-binary people and queer people are just like, oh, I'd love to talk about rape culture and patriarchy. And it's not because like we're buzzkills, but it's because we're being affected by horrible things and all the time. And I think that when your life's been a little bit easier, like it must be really fun to just get to like dream and like rise above the constant fray that you're feeling all the time. So I don't know, it never has occurred to me to separate things, because to me, this pain is here all the time. All of these feelings of like isolation and alienation are alone all the time. So the only way that it makes me feel better is to make something comedic, make a song out of it, whatever. I don't know any other way to exist.
Yeah, a money show that wasn't funny would just be like every other money show.
Right. Yeah.
Very boring. I don't even listen to those.
So in thinking about both of your books together for me, I was thinking of how much overlap there is in these topics, and how being alone or not being alone plays into our financial lives, and also how finances play into being alone and not being alone.
Oh, it so does. I know.
Right?
Yeah.
I feel like maybe you could speak a little bit to the alone, not alone aspects of money, and we could then talk about the other.
Oh,
Yeah, the book came from isolation, because money was the thing I would cry about the most, and I would cry by myself about it all the time. It's like a thing where my sister comes to my apartment to do her laundry, and she was there already. She let herself in, and she was doing laundry, and I came home, and I was like, I just need to go to my room and close the door and cry. And she was like, you okay? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, what's this about? And I was like, it's about money. And she was like, okay, should I leave? And I was like, no, you can stay. So she just was in the living room doing laundry and like watching TV, and I just cried in my room for like 2 hours by myself. She was like, Doc, you need anything? I was like, no, it's just about money, it's fine. But like, it was this thing that I would cry about all the time. And then it was like you were allowed to sort of go to your friends and be like, I'm having this dating problem, or like this girl's not texting me back or whatever. And then they would be like, oh my God, like, yes, like I get it, like cry to me. But if you were like, I don't understand retirement, like your friend is not gonna be like, there, like it's just not a thing. So like it was very isolating, and I had this image, like I would cry in my car a lot, because that's a very LA thing to do. It's glamorous, you cry in your car, like a dignified person. And so like I had this image of crying in my car, and then of like a bunch of cars parked next to me in a garage, and everyone crying in their car alone. And I was like, when I thought of that, I was like, oh, that was like part of the reason for starting the podcast that eventually became the book, because I was like, wait a minute, everyone's crying alone in their car, and we could just open the car door and be like, what are you crying about? And so once I started talking about the money stuff and how much it like affected me, it became way less isolating. And once it became less isolating, then it became less powerful. But it was when it was a big secret, it was like the most powerful thing. And then once it stopped being a secret, then it didn't have that much power over me anymore. And then I was in line for something at the podcast studio, and there was like another guy who's a producer, and I was on my phone, and he was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm thinking about consolidating my loans, like to a stranger. And like me 3 years ago would have been like, nothing, I'm looking at porn, leave me alone. So it's like I think in my conspiracy theory hat is that rich people don't want us to talk to each other so that we don't figure things out.
I was actually going to go there.
Yeah.
Like the economic forces beyond us that actually want us to, I was thinking about it in terms of being alone too, like be in a Groupon or get married or like have these things that, and like weddings, they're so wonderful and joyful, but like they cost so much. They cost so much for the people.
I think it's the people at the top that are like, talking about money's taboo.
Yeah.
They're just like filtering that in so that then we're all like, oh, we can't talk about money. And then nobody ever figures anything out. And then the people at the top are like, we did it.
Yeah, like the embarrassment about talking about money or about being alone or any of those things really plays into an economic system that,
Well, but also there's a way more direct tie to that. I mean, the amount of times that I've seen us, even look at like the Forbes 30 under 30, like it's like 99% of those people come from rich families. Like, why are we not going to talk about that? Like, let's fucking talk about it. Like, there was almost no way they could fail. Like, I'm sorry, there just wasn't. And it pisses me off to watch, like, look at what they did by 18. Yeah, their parents were billionaires who owned a chain of hotels. I'm not surprised they did that by 18. Like, yeah. But like, we have to rip this veil off because it's fucking stupid. I'm not saying we can't, give them, like, sure, I want to pat someone on the back if they did a cool thing, but I do think there should be an asterisk that's like millionaire parents. Like, why the fuck not? It's just really, because the thing is, so much of what I wanted to do with How to Be Alone was address the fact that, like, we're all acting like we're all running in the same race, and we all have the same shoes, and, like, we're fucking not. And, like, a big thing that I talk about in the book is when I was interning at The Onion, and, like, everyone around me, their parents were putting them up in like a $5,000 a month Park Avenue apartment. They were giving them all this money. I didn't have any money to eat. I wasn't making any money because I was an intern. And just all waiting to, like, for it to be rewarded. And there were so many years in the early part of my career where I was just straight up being exploited by, like, the biggest media corporations, like straight up on food stamps.
We have very overlapping situations where I was like, Viacom fucked me up. Like,
there's
I was the
so
intern
many.
at The Daily Show. I had no money. I was like, I couldn't figure out where to live. It was like, and you're working 40 hours a week, and Viacom was not paying at that time.
Oh yeah, I have a lot of Gawker thoughts.
Yep.
I was their, like, most read writer on all of their platforms. I was getting paid $100 a day for 15 posts, all my own. Like, it's insane. You're just like, those are like Cambodian sweatshop wages. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
But it was just like, oh, who cares? Who cares? And I was just supposed to shut up and be quiet for the opportunity, or because the assumption was that, well, you have a wealthy family, right?
Yeah.
And, like, I was a homeless teenager. Like, but nobody's thinking like that. Everybody in the arts just assumes you did the right thing and were assigned rich parents at birth. Like, I didn't choose that or not choose that. It's insane.
It didn't even occur to me till I got to LA when I was 25. I internalized so much where I was just like, I'm not good enough. It must be that I'm not working hard enough.
Totally.
Or I would, like, see the people next to me and be like, shit, like, you're right, like, they are dressed better, like, okay, so what am I doing wrong? And then when I got to LA at 25, my friend was like, my parents own the condo I live in. I was like,
right.
What? Like, it just really did not, I thought, instead of looking outward and being like, oh my God, these people or whatever, I was like, well, what's wrong with me?
Totally,
For
but that's
years.
the way it's set up.
It's
set up so that but that's the whole thing about talking about it and not talking about it, is that I didn't have anyone to talk to about it, and I felt my own shame about literally coming from nothing, and I really thought, and this makes me angry, like, constantly, I really thought that the way the world worked was, if you work harder than anybody, if you just break your body and your mind and your spirit and you work harder than anybody, you'll be financially rewarded. And the number of times that I could tell you where I did the job of multiple people and people just went, thank you, here's nothing, so often. Yeah. But the thing is, but that also ties back to a financial thing. Like, I think about this all the time. Like, when it comes to families and love, like, it really is a rich get richer situation, because when you were raised, and I like to clarify this because sometimes people are like, well, I was raised in a loving family, but we didn't have money. I'm like, no, that's its own currency. Because if you were raised with a loving family that taught you that you were worth something innately and that you deserved all these things, like, you're not gonna put up with a job like that. You're not gonna put up with a job that's like, fuck you forever, here's a nickel. Like, because A, you'll know you're worth more, but B, you'll have someone to go to and be like, hey, this is kind of happening, and your parents will be like, fuck that, this is illegal, this is whatever. Like, you have advocates. So there's just, the more, even after writing the book, like, I'm constantly uncovering ways that, like, people who grew up with the extreme privilege of having a loving family, and then the extreme privilege of having a loving family who was also financially solvent, just really continues to pay dividends. It's incredible.
I think it's interesting that you say that because one thing that stuck with me in your financial advice component of the book was you were like, for younger people, ask everyone about jobs. Like if you, and it doesn't have to be like your uncle's rich and is going to get you this great job. It's like, but you have to have those people. Like you have to have those people that you feel close enough to really like just ask them and even, to get that little job that you like, that's going to give you a little bedrock of how it is to work and that kind of thing. But, if you start behind the 8 ball there, then that's really, really tough. You don't have that. We're rounding the corner toward the Q&A portion here, but I did want to touch on something a little bit lighter, but it's also might not be. Is both of you guys really reference pop culture a lot, and I think it's interesting just in terms of not so much of like why we love pop culture and have these touchstones, but like what models the pop culture that you grew up with provided in terms of the topics of your book. Like when you reference some of these things, like you had Plan Bay for Michael Bay that you were gonna like how you're gonna get pay back all your debt or whatever. It's like do something.
It's a book, a Michael Bay movie.
Yeah,
and then never work again.
And but like there's My So-Called Life and Rayanne and Blink-182 you just said and Courtney Love and Fiona Apple and so just to talk a little bit about some of the significant pop cultural touchstones as they apply to your books.
I think I haven't really thought this through that much, but I think it was...
Well, one thing you said, just before you go,
Yeah.
one thing you did say also was that every show in the WB had a college acceptance episode.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
sort of
yeah,
like
yeah.
Things like that kind of like, well, of course that happens. Of course
Of course you go to college.
go to
Of course
great
it's a big
college,
deal. Of course everyone's freaking out about it. And then it's like somehow everyone ends up going to the same college. That we're all
they
friends.
always, you're going there too? What are the odds? That
Fascinating.
never happens.
A local community college they all end up going to, even the really smart girl because she wants to stay with her boyfriend, something like that. Yeah. Except for Summer who goes to Brown. But anyway, see, why do I know that? I think either I there was like a lot of shit going on in my house and I took it and put it away somewhere and then filled that space with just pop culture trivia. Or I think also, I have a lot of stuff where I couldn't tell you what happened yesterday, but if you wanted a full rundown of, like I said, every season of the OC, I've got you. I think there's a lot of losing yourself in fictional worlds. I did a lot of that. I did a lot of watching a ton of movies, watching a ton of TV, reading a lot of books, just sort of, I'm Gemini, so I love knowing things. So any trivia, I just somehow have that in my head. But then if my therapist is like, well, how was your dad when you were little? I'm like, I don't know. So I think I think that sometimes it helps because it is a thing that everyone has in common. If you use that as something when you're writing, if you use that as an example, it's a very easy example because I think there's stuff that our generation, at least I'm sort of millennial, little maybe older millennial, but or maybe middle millennial, but it's there's stuff that we all, I think somehow, even if we didn't watch it, we knew it was going on. There's touchstones of things that happened. I've just had a whole tweet thing where I was remember when Complicated by Avril Lavigne came out and then we were all gay? And that's a thing that everyone knows about. Cause it happened.
I hated her.
Really?
I still hate her.
I
think she's a horrible person.
Oh, I made my mom write her name down. I was like, what's that girl's name? Please write it down so I can practice saying it. She is my wife.
You could have her. I will not fight you for Avril Lavigne. Oh my God.
That is crazy.
Ugh, she was my nightmare.
She wore a tie.
She was a nightmare. She was
crazy.
Someone created a Canadian lab.
Yeah.
It was just she'll be punk or something. And she was I guess. I feel like she showed up to a casting for edgy white teens.
I bought it.
I returned it. I was no.
She also married the guy from
I really didn't think this would devolve into how much I hate Avril Lavigne.
No, I love that.
If I met her on the street, I'd be like, I bet you're nice.
We
Like,
came
whatever.
to a courthouse to debate Avril
Yeah,
Lavigne.
exactly. Objection! Avril Lavigne was bullshit. She was like, Your Honor.
Let Go is a seminal album. In this essay, I will.
Those times were clip-ons, Your Honor. Exhibit A. Oh my God. Now that's all I want this panel to be. Yeah. So related, the dedication page of my book is literally a list. It's no people I know. It is just my favorite bands, movies, books, everything. And it was a little bit of like a fuck you to all the people who write books about having a really hard life, and then they're like, to my beautiful wife Diane and my loving mother, and I'm like, okay. Like I wanted to be like, okay, I'm writing a book about how to be alone, and really not having those people to even put in that dedication because I don't really know who they are yet. But these are the people who raised me. Like books and movies and music raised me. Like they were my touchstones. And I talk a lot about really loving literary orphans. Like I really love Anne of Green Gables. I talk a lot about Anne of Green Gables in the book, and then I go to Prince Edward Island, and it's a whole thing. But I talk a lot about that, and Matilda and Pippi Longstocking, and like just growing up with all of these really magical, really weird, probably queer orphans who, you know, came from really shitty homes and then either found some sort of family or some sort of community, and like that was what I dreamt of. But those are all of, I mean, and then I think also it was easy to retreat into, and I still do that. Like one of my friends told me that like when I rewatch these TV shows over and over again, it's like me spending time with my family, and it really is. Like it was so like gutting but beautiful, because like I don't want to leave it. Like I will watch like 6 seasons of a show and then start it again, because I'm like, when I go home tonight, I'm gonna see my friends, and it's like they're Mad Men or whatever it is, Veronica Mars, whatever it is that week, but it'll be like chunks of time. Like I'll spend like 2 months in this world over and over again, and it's like a little bit obsessive and nuts, but it's like in my head, like this is the world I want to live in that isn't this world. But then it was also like, it's kind of two-pronged, because it was also like, I knew that I wanted to make music, and I knew that I wanted to make TV, and I wanted to be a writer. So it was like escaping into these worlds and finding friendship and family and love and connection through art forms. But also it was like studying. Like I used to lock myself in my bathroom for like 6 hours and like try to hit every note of every musician I loved, and like deconstruct songs, and like, because I knew I wanted to be a musician. And so it was like, it was part escapism and part like studying for my future. Yeah.
So you guys, I have like 4 more questions, but I'm gonna open it up to questions because I think we're got like 5 minutes left. So does anyone have any questions for our authors? If you don't, I have 4. So. No, go ahead.
What's
It's
up?
you. It's all you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So she's saying that book writing requires some alone time and solitude, and also financial resources to be able to do it. So maybe both could respond to how those things impacted their book writing.
What's cool about nonfiction is they pay you up front. With fiction, you have to like often show the book, and then they go, we like it, and they pay you. With nonfiction, you're just like, oh, here's my idea, and then they go, here you go, here's a year to write this. But also I stared at the blank page, and then I just started, I was just like, type, like saying type out loud, because I was just like, you gotta start typing. Like there was like a few days where they were like, okay, the book's like greenlit, contract signed, whatever. And then I was like looking at Word being like, fuck. But I always am like, let's just have a bunch of garbage, and then you can go through the garbage and be like, okay, what seems good? So I overwrote the book. So it was supposed to be like somewhere between, it was supposed to be like 60,000 words, let's say, and I wrote like 100,000. Like I just overwrote it so that when I turned it in, if they were like 40,000 of these words are garbage, I'd be like, well, I still hit the mark. Like, I wanted to, like, and so I just type. And then chapters were cut, like, whole tangents were cut, which is helpful because I'm much better at the editing process. Like, I'm much better at, like, word dump and then edit. So I had a year to do it, and for a lot of it, it was just, like, dumping whatever thoughts I had, and then a lot of it was repetitive. A lot of it I would be like, I already told that story, or like, oh, I broke up with that person, so let's cut them from the book, or like whatever. That happened twice. Everything's fine. And so like I just, instead of, I always am like, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be done. So like you can't give it to an editor to make it good if you don't have anything. So I just kept thinking that. So I would just sit and just type, and then just be like, I'm sure this is majority bad, but I'm always like, you got to have something to then like sculpt from. So that was my process, was just to do that, and then also like lay on the floor and whine, and then also think about like they gave you money, so you have to do it, and then I was also excited because it was easy. It was a lot easier too because I had the podcast. So sometimes I would go through, it's like all not from the podcast, it's all different. And I got to I went and interviewed my whole family and like interviewed people, and I did a lot of like research on myself. So I like read my own diaries. So like it was more dynamic, I think, than just sitting and writing fiction had been for me in the past. Sitting and writing fiction is like you're locked in a room and you and Allison stare at each other and go, what should happen next? But this was like a bit more research heavy.
We have a time for Elaine to answer, and then I think we have to stampede out of here. And I think it's funny how when I was growing up, they told me that, in your lifetime, people are gonna have 15 jobs in their lifetime. It's not gonna be like it was before. And I'm like, these girls
I've had
have
over 200.
You have 15 jobs at once. You know what I mean? It's like there are 15 jobs at one time. And I think so it's interesting to hear about your process, because it's like you're juggling and keeping a lot of plates in the air, both of you. So
Yeah. I don't know. The process is difficult for me to talk about because it sucked. And I didn't have a lot of support through it in terms of like things I was going through emotionally. And then I realized why no one writes a book like this unless they're in a great place, because it fucking sucks. Unless they have like an incredible support team, because I didn't. But I just, similarly, I went back and forth between being like, I don't want to write this, forget it, scrap it, I'll give the money back, I don't give a shit. But then